Texas Hill Country, April 1873. The soles of her feet bled by the time the sun broke the hills, but Henrietta Talbot did not stop. Not when the mesquite tore at her skirts, not when the rocks sliced her skin, not even when the horse she had stolen bucked her 3 miles back and ran for the trees. She had nothing but a cracked water flask and a broken prayer, but she was free. The bruises on her arms still burned, but they were fading. The man who gave them to her, Thomas Reddick, was miles behind now, maybe still sleeping off the whiskey. She had slipped from his bed at midnight, wrapped her shawl tight, and ran barefoot through the pasture with only the moon to see her. The gate had squealed, the horse had reared, and her heart had nearly failed, but she had gotten out. That was all that mattered. Henrietta pressed a shaking hand to her ribs and looked across the open land. It was dry, gold grass and cedar brush for miles, and the sky was going pale blue over the ridges. Somewhere out here was the man she'd heard about in hushed tones at the general store, a quiet cowboy who kept to himself, lived alone on a stretch of land near the Frio River, took in injured calves, and once pulled a neighbor's son from a flooded arroyo. They called him steady, dependable. She had no plan. Only the name Jack Avery and the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would not turn her away. By noon, the heat was heavy on her shoulders. She stumbled more than once, her breath coming in short bursts. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Her feet felt like rawhide. Just when the sky began to blur, and she thought she might collapse where she stood, she saw it, a small cabin tucked between live oaks, a fence stretched wide around cattle, and a man on horseback moving slow near the corral. Henrietta gripped the fence post and called out, voice hoarse, "Please, sir?" The cowboy turned. He was young, maybe 30, broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair curling at the edge of his collar. He dismounted in one easy move and walked toward her. His eyes were sharp, cautious at first, but when he saw her feet, he moved faster. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was low and steady. "I need help," she said, legs giving out. She sank to her knees in the dirt. "Please." "I ran. I had to." Jack caught her before she hit the ground fully, one arm bracing her back. "You're safe now," he said, already lifting her. She did not remember much after that. When she woke, she was in a bed. The sheets smelled clean, and sunlight filtered through the open window. Her feet were wrapped, and her head no longer pounded. She turned and saw him sitting in a chair across the room, arms crossed, watching her with a calm she had never known in a man. "You are safe," he said again, like he needed her to believe it this time. Henrietta's throat tightened. "Thank you?" He nodded once. "You want to tell me your name?" "Henrietta Talbot." He stood and poured water into a tin cup, brought it to her gently. "Jack Avery." She took it with both hands, steadying herself. "I did not know where else to go." "You came a long way barefoot," he said. "That tells me enough for now." She looked down at her lap. Her fingers trembled. "He would have killed me if I stayed." Jack's jaw tightened, but he did not ask who. Instead, he said, "You can stay here. As long as you need." "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I do not turn away folks running from hell." Henrietta looked at him fully then. His face was weathered from sun and wind, his eyes a quiet kind. There was no pity in them, only understanding. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. That evening, Jack helped her to the porch. She sat wrapped in a blanket while he fed the horses. The land was quiet, soft with dusk. A breeze stirred the trees, and she breathed easier than she had in years. "You live out here alone?" she asked. He glanced back. "My brother used to run it with me. He died in Kansas 2 winters ago. Since then, just me." "I am sorry," she said. He shrugged, not carelessly, just like it still hurt, but he had made peace with it. "I keep busy." Henrietta watched him work, a man who moved without rush, who whistled softly to his cattle, who did not speak much, but when he did, it was with care. She could not remember the last time someone had looked at her without wanting something in return. You do not ask many questions, she said after a while. I will, when you are ready to answer. She managed a quiet laugh. That may take a while. I have time. That night, he made a stew from dried venison and potatoes, set the bowl in her hands like it was something sacred. She ate slow, her eyes never leaving his. He did not press her for the story. He only listened when she began to speak. His name was Thomas. My husband, she said. My father arranged it. Said I was lucky? Jack nodded once, his face unreadable. He drank. Hurt me when no one was around. Said I was his and no one else would ever want me. Jack's eyes darkened. He was wrong. She blinked. You do not even know me. I know what fear looks like, he said. And I know what it means to survive it. Henrietta looked away, but her chest felt lighter. She was not used to kindness that asked for nothing. The next morning, Jack was already outside by the time she hobbled to the porch. He helped her down the steps without a word, his hand warm and firm on her arm. They fenced together that afternoon. She insisted on helping despite the pain, and he did not stop her. Just handed her gloves and worked beside her in silence. You are stubborn, he said once. You let me be. He gave a small smile. You are allowed to be strong here. 2 weeks passed. Henrietta's feet healed. She learned to saddle a horse properly, how to mend a torn fence wire, how to cook beans over the fire without burning them. Every day she stayed, Jack gave her space, but he was there, always there. When she woke from nightmares, he brought her tea. When she laughed again for the first time, he looked at her like it meant something. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she stood beside him by the paddock. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, their fingers brushing. I never thought I would feel safe again, she murmured. He looked over at her, quiet for a long beat. You are more than safe, Henrietta. You are home. She turned to him, her breath catching. Jack! I am not rushing you, he said. But if you ever want more than this, I am here. She stepped closer, her eyes bright. I think I already do. He reached for her hand, and she let him. His fingers wrapped around hers, strong and steady. For the first time in years, she did not feel like something broken. She felt wanted. Seen. And she was not running anymore. The rains came late that spring, but when they did, they settled deep into the soil, stirring up the wildflowers and softening the sharp edge of the land. Jack had been mending the east fence when he felt the first drop and turned toward the cabin, already picturing Henrietta at the stove, flour on her elbows, sleeves rolled to the crook of her arm. She was learning the place like it had always belonged to her. Inside, she was humming low and off-key, pressing dough into rounds for supper. The fire snapped beneath the kettle, and the scent of lard and cornmeal filled the room. You always hum when you cook? Jack asked as he shut the door behind him, shaking water from his hat. Henrietta didn't glance up. Only when the bread's going to rise proper. My aunt used to say good food listens. Jack hung his hat and stepped out of his boots. Then it's got a better ear than me. She looked over her shoulder, one brow lifted. You're not as quiet as you think. He crossed to the wash basin, hands thick with dirt. You're the first person in years to say that. I'm the first person in years to stay long enough to hear you. The rain picked up, drumming soft against the roof. Henrietta slid the bread into the oven and wiped her hands on her apron. Her eyes lingered on Jack's back as he scrubbed his hands. There was something about the way he moved, measured, attentive, that settled her nerves. Jack, she said, quieter now. He turned, drying his hands on a cloth. Yeah? You don't talk much about your brother. Jack folded the towel and leaned both hands on the edge of the table. Clay was older. Loud. Always chasing something: horses, women, trouble. He had a way of getting folks to follow him, even when they shouldn't. I followed him once too often. Henrietta studied him. You went up to Kansas with him? Dodge. He said there was money to be made running cattle. We lost more than we brought back. He caught fever halfway home. I got him as far as Abilene. Her voice dropped. You buried him there? Jack nodded. Under a pecan tree. Sheriff helped. Henrietta reached for a knife, began slicing turnips without looking up. You ever blame yourself? Only when I can't sleep. The knife slowed in her hand. I know what that feels like. I reckon you do. They didn't speak for a while. The fire crackled and the smell of baking bread thickened the air. Jack moved to the hearth, stoked the coals, and threw on a split log. Henrietta stepped beside him, holding 2 tin cups of chicory brew. He took one with a nod. Thanks. She sipped hers, watching the flame. I thought about turning back that first night. When I lost the horse. My hands were shaking so hard, I couldn't untie the flask. Jack didn't look at her. What made you keep walking? I remembered my mother's hands. She had calluses from the plow, and she used to say, a woman's strength isn't in her fists, it's in her feet. Where she plants 'em, and where she won't. Jack took a slow drink. Sounds like she knew what she was talking about. She died before I could tell her I did listen. They stood there a long time, shoulder to shoulder, heat radiating from the hearth and something quieter rising between them. Later that week, when the skies cleared, Jack saddled his mare and led her toward the ridge. Henrietta followed on foot, her steps sure now, her stride even. He watched her from the corner of his eye, not out of worry, but because he liked the way she carried herself when she forgot to be cautious. They reached the top as the sun slid low, painting the valley in amber and rust. The river gleamed in the distance, winding through the cottonwoods like melted silver. I come up here when I need to breathe, Jack said, dismounting. Henrietta rested her hands on the saddle horn. It's strange, the way silence feels different here. Not sharp, like it did in the house I left. This kind's gentle. He tied the mare to a cedar stump and sat on a flat stone. You ever think about leaving Texas? I used to dream of it. Now I think maybe it wasn't Texas that needed changing, just where I stood in it. Jack glanced at her, his tone soft. There's room here, if you want to stand beside me. She met his gaze, heart steady. That offer's still good if I've got a temper and a bad knee? He smiled with his eyes more than his mouth. I've seen both. Still standing. Her fingers brushed the edge of his hand where it rested on his thigh. He didn't pull away. Down in the valley, the cattle moved slow across the pasture, and the wind carried the scent of blooming sage. Henrietta leaned into his shoulder, just enough to feel the warmth through his shirt. I want to stay, she said. Jack didn't speak, just reached over and laced his fingers with hers. And for once, there was no fear in her chest. Only stillness. Only home. By late May, the heat pressed down thicker and the wind carried dust instead of rain. The ground cracked in long seams across the pasture, and the creek behind the cabin slowed to a trickle between the stones. Jack rode out earlier each morning to check the herd, and Henrietta learned to patch water barrels with pine pitch while the sun climbed high over the ridge. One afternoon, she squatted beside the root cellar, sorting dried apples into sacks, when she heard hoofbeats. She stood slowly, brushing earth from her skirt, and squinted toward the road. A wagon creaked into view, drawn by a sway-back mule. The driver was a woman with a linen bonnet tied low and a boy perched beside her, legs swinging. Jack stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. Miss Callie, he called, walking toward the gate. You're far from home. The woman pulled the mule to a stop and shaded her eyes. Jack Avery, I'm not here for pleasantries. My roof caved in last storm and I need your ladder. And maybe strong arms if you can spare 'em. Jack leaned on the fence rail. You bring payment? Half a sack of sorghum and a dozen eggs. And I baked. Henrietta stepped closer, curiosity tugging at her. The boy on the wagon blinked at her, then grinned. Jack motioned to her. This is Henrietta Talbot. She's staying on here. Callie studied her a moment. You bake? Henrietta hesitated. Somewhat. Then you and I'll get along. I'm too old to knead dough and my boy's too young. Jack unlatched the gate. I'll hitch the wagon. Ladder's in the shed. By the time they returned from Callie's homestead, the sun was low and the mule was limping. Jack carried the ladder back on horseback, and Henrietta sat in the wagon seat beside Callie, the boy asleep against her arm. You're not from around here, Callie said without turning. No, running from something? Henrietta looked at the child's hand curled in her lap. I was. Not anymore. Callie gave a quiet nod. Jack's good folks. He's never let me go without. Henrietta glanced over. He doesn't say much about himself. He doesn't have to, Callie said. He shows you. That night, they ate by lantern light. Henrietta set the sweetbread on the table, and Jack sliced it with care. He passed her the first piece, not meeting her eyes. She set it down untouched. You ever think about what comes next? He looked up. You mean the cattle? Or the land? No. I mean, after this. After the running stops. After the healing started. Jack leaned back, the firelight catching the scar near his temple she hadn't noticed before. I think about planting pecans along the creek. I think about building a second room. One with a window that faces morning. She rested her elbows on the table. Why a window? So whoever wakes in it remembers the light comes back. She let that settle between them before speaking again. I could help frame that room. He smiled, just barely. You could draw it too if you wanted. You've got a way of seeing space. Henrietta blinked. I haven't picked up charcoal since before I married. Doesn't mean you forgot how. She looked down at her hands. I used to draw everything. My mother's hands. The creek near our farm. Things I was afraid I'd lose. Jack reached for his cup, then paused. You haven't lost anything here. She looked up. I know. A week later, they rode out to the ridge again, this time with measuring rope and a post-hole digger. Jack handed her the rough end of a sketching slate he'd found in an old trunk, and she stood in the late afternoon light, scratching out the lines of a new room walls, a doorframe, a window facing east. Never thought I'd be building something again, she said. You're not building it alone. She held the slate up, turning it so the sun caught the lines. It'll be small. Jack nodded. So long as it holds two people. Her voice barely carried. You mean me and you? He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as he took the slate. I do. She drew a breath, slow and steady. Then I want it. The room. The window. The rest of it. Jack's fingers curled around hers. We'll start digging tomorrow. And they did. By morning, the sun rose through the trees, and for the first time in years, Henrietta stood on land she'd chosen, beside someone who had chosen her back. Together they began to build. By mid-June, the frame of the new room stood square and tall beside the cabin, its beams sanded smooth and joined without gaps. The walls had yet to be chinked, but already Henrietta could see the light fall through the east-facing window at dawn, just the way she'd drawn it. She spent her mornings sorting nails in the shade while Jack cut boards, and her evenings walking the creek's edge, memorizing the path of minnows and the way the cottonwoods leaned. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and the air cooled, Jack sat beside her outside the cabin, sharpening his drawknife. The scent of pine shavings clung to his shirt. She watched his hands move, steady and practiced, and let the silence stretch. I saw a girl once, she said, her voice low. When I was 14. She'd run from her husband, too. Folks found her in the arroyo half-starved. They said she was touched in the head for leaving him. Jack paused, turning the blade against the stone. You think they were wrong? I think she did what she had to. But I didn't understand her then. I do now. He set the knife down with care and looked at her. You feel like they'd say the same of you? I don't know what they'd say. I just know I don't care anymore. Jack leaned back, resting one arm along the bench. I care what you think. About this place. About me. Henrietta traced a knot in the wood beneath her fingers. You want the truth? He nodded once. I didn't expect to feel whole again. I thought maybe I'd just vanish quiet out here like smoke. But I don't feel gone anymore. Jack didn't take his eyes from her. You're not. She drew a breath. There's something else. All right. I never told Thomas this either, but I lost a child. Early on. Before he even knew I was carrying. I buried the pain so deep, I forgot how to hold anything soft. Jack's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. I never wanted to be a mother with him. But I think I would have been one, if things had been different. He reached out, slow, and set his hand over hers. They are different now. Henrietta looked up. You'd want children? On this land? I would. She nodded, her voice breaking just a little. Then I would, too. A few days later, Jack brought her to a dry patch above the creek, where wild plum trees had taken root. He knelt in the dirt and began carving a shallow trench with the edge of his boot. I thought we could put the garden here, he said. So you'll have something to tend when the rains come back. Henrietta crouched beside him. You think I need something to tend? I think you've got the hands for growing things. And the heart. She pressed her palm to the earth. You always speak like you see more than what's in front of you. Maybe I do. They worked side by side till the sun lowered and the sky went streaked with rose. He taught her how to test the soil with her fingertips, and how to read the wind by how the taller grass bent. She showed him how to mark rows with twine and keep birds away with strips of cloth. They didn't speak of Thomas again. Nor did she ask if Jack ever wished for a different life. It was enough to build this one. On the first day of July, Henrietta stood in the doorway of the nearly finished room, a broom in hand. The floorboards were sanded, the window fitted tight. She had sewn curtains from a feed sack, and they stirred faintly in the breeze. Jack came in behind her, carrying a small wooden box. He opened it and took out a carved figure, a mare, slender-necked and worn smooth at the edges. My brother made it. For his daughter. She died before her first birthday. Henrietta turned to him. I kept it, he said, setting it on the windowsill. Figured maybe I'd know when it was time to let it breathe again. She stepped closer. It's time. They stood there as the lights slid across the floor, casting long lines between them. Then Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring of woven horsehair, bound tight with copper wire. I don't have gold, he said. But I made this. With what I had. Henrietta took it in her palm, her chest aching in the best way. It's strong. So are you. She slid it onto her finger. Then let's build everything from that. And they did. With quiet days and steady hands, with trust that grew from action, not words. The land held them. The wind knew them. And the morning light always found its way through the window they had built together. The garden had begun to take. Shoots of beans and squash climbed the twine Henrietta tied between stakes, and the soil, once stubborn and cracked, held water longer now that she mulched it with dry grass. By late July, the days stretched hot and hushed, cicadas rattling in the mesquites, and the nights stayed warm enough that she and Jack often left the windows open, letting the sound of the running creek drift in through the quiet. Henrietta had taken to waking before the sun, not from fear anymore but from habit, her body still remembering the hours when she once slipped from danger in silence. Now, she used the time for herself. She sat on the porch with her sketchbook, drawing the shape of the land as it looked at dawn, the slope of the hill behind the barn, the curve of the creek as it wound west. She didn't draw people, her fingers still hesitated at the shape of a face, but she was beginning to try. Jack came up behind her one morning, boots in hand, hair still damp from the water barrel. You always draw with your jaw set like that. I don't notice, she said, not looking up. Probably means I'm thinking too hard. Or maybe it just means you care what you're putting down. She turned the page, revealing a rough sketch of the new room, window open, curtains lifting. I care about what we've made. Jack crouched beside her, studying the lines. How'd you learn to see space like this? Proportions, angles. My grandfather was a cooper. He used to make me trace barrels with chalk. Said if I could get the rim right, I could draw anything. Jack tapped the edge of the porch rail. We could use another barrel. For rainwater, if the sky ever remembers how. I could try making one, she said, half teasing. You try, I'll help. That evening, they rode out to the bluff past the southern fence line. Jack had a parcel in his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth. He waited until they'd dismounted and the horses were grazing on what was left of the June grass before handing it to her. Henrietta raised a brow. What's this? Open it. Inside was a length of muslin, dyed soft green, with her initials stitched in the corner. The thread was uneven, the lines not quite straight. I tried sewing it myself, Jack said, clearing his throat. Callie showed me how. Henrietta ran her fingers over the stitching. It's for the baby, isn't it? He nodded. I know it's early. Just wanted something ready. She folded it carefully and tucked it against her chest. It's perfect. They sat on the grass, the horses behind them, the horizon lit like a banked fire. I've been thinking, she said after a while. When the baby comes, we'll need a cradle. I could build one, Jack said. But I've never made anything that small. You could make anything, long as you cut it with care. He looked at her sideways. That what you think I've done with this life? Henrietta pressed her hand to his. I think you've built it one honest piece at a time. Jack leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers. You ever get scared now and then? Even with all this? I do, she whispered. But it doesn't take hold anymore. Not like before. They rode home slow, their shadows long beside them, the wind lifting the scent of dry sage and warm cedar. That night, as they lay together beneath the simple rafters Jack had shaped by hand, she rested her head just over the place where new life stirred beneath her ribs. Promise me something, she said into the stillness. Anything. If I ever forget how far we've come, remind me. Jack kissed her temple, his voice steady in the dark. I'll remind you every day. The baby was born in early February, just before dawn, when the frost still clung to the cabin roof and the creek ran high from winter melt. Callie came to help, bringing her mother's old midwife tools and a calm that soothed Henrietta through the worst of the pain. Jack never left her side, save to fetch more water or warm cloths by the fire. When the child came, a girl with dark hair and lungs strong enough to shake the shutters, Henrietta wept not from fear, but from the weight of joy she hadn't known she could carry. Jack held the baby wrapped in the green muslin cloth he had stitched, his hand gentle along her tiny back. She looks like you, he said. Henrietta smiled, exhausted and radiant. She looks like us. They named her Clara, after Jack's mother, a woman Henrietta had never met but who must have taught her sons how to hold people gently. By spring, the garden was full again, and the plum trees had bloomed early. Henrietta wore her wide-brimmed hat and carried Clara in a sling across her chest while she weeded the rows. Jack built the cradle beside the hearth, using scraps from the new room's floorboards. He carved Clara's name into the headboard and sanded it smooth so she'd never catch her hand on a splinter. Neighbors came by more often, bringing preserves and cloth, and Henrietta, once wary of every knock, now opened the door with Clara in her arms and a calm she'd earned. Folks didn't ask questions about where she'd come from anymore. They saw what she'd built, and that was enough. One afternoon, Callie brought her boy and a basket of eggs. While the children napped and the stew simmered, the two women shelled peas on the porch. Callie glanced toward the new room and smiled. You ever think you'd get all this? She asked. Henrietta looked out over the land, the corral, the trees, the line of smoke curling from the chimney. Then to the man who had given her space to heal and the daughter asleep against her shoulder. No, she said. But I never stopped wanting it. Callie nodded. That's the difference. Jack came up from the far pasture as the sun dipped low, his shirt damp with sweat and his face flushed from the heat. He handed Henrietta a single wildflower, gold and stubborn, growing from dry soil. Found this near the fence, he said. She took it, tucking it into the braid behind her ear. You always bring things home. Jack brushed his hand along Clara's back as she stirred in sleep. Only the things that matter. That night, after the baby had settled and the fire burned low, Henrietta sat with Jack on the porch, their hands twined, the stars sharp and bright above them. I used to think survival was the best I could hope for, she said. But this is more. Jack kissed the side of her head, slow and certain. It's everything. And it was. The land, the home, the child, the love each piece earned, not all at once but over time, with hands that had learned how to build, and hearts that had learned how to stay. Together, they watched the night settle easy over the hills, knowing when morning came, they would wake not to fear, but to light. Always to light.